Good morning and welcome to this session on PCI 4.0, entitled PCI 4.0, What is Coming and What Do You Need to Do About It? Or as I now want to call it, How to Be a Rock Star. I'm Gary Perkins with CISO Global, the company that believes cybersecurity is a culture, not a product, and I'll be your host today. I have some PCI experts from CISO with me, and we're going to cover what you need to know to get your organization on the path to compliance. So thank you to each of you for joining us here today. I know that by planning in advance, you can avoid PCI surprises. Now, we're going to be happy to take your questions as time permits, and we'll circle back with any that we miss and maybe stay a little bit after this session's officially over. Now, do note that there is a 1-minute delay between what you hear on the line and us having a chance of seeing what you've written. I am super excited to have Joe Moser and Brian Dean here with me today. They are both QSAs, that's Qualified Security Assessors, and they're going to give you their best tips and tricks to ensure success with PCI. Now, they'd be very happy to give you specific advice through a formal engagement with your company, but please don't run off and design a program solely on what you hear today and then be disappointed that your PCI dreams did not materialize. This is a special behind the scenes look, but not meant to be an exhaustive how to build a PCI program workshop. We're going to cover the reality that is PCI and version 4.0 and the impact on future assessments, what to expect with the new version, differences between 4.0 and 3.2.1, and the steps you need to take right away to prepare. Now's the time to plan your 2024 PCI assessment. The content that we're going to record here will be available after the session. And if you're enjoying it here today, please feel free to tell your friends during and after. We're going to have blog posts and more materials posted going forward. Now, before I get initial thoughts from our experts, I'm going to tell you, leading up to the call, I thought that even though PCI is a very serious topic, that maybe ChatGPT can help find some humor in it. I asked it for some jokes, and man, was I wrong. Apparently, even AI can't make PCI funny, but I'm going to share it with you here anyway. I'm not making this up. This is ChatGPT's idea of a PCI joke, word for word. Why did the payment card industry compliance officer bring a ladder to work? Because they needed to reach the highest security standards and they weren't taking any shortcuts. Oh, we can do better than that, folks. Fortunately, the internet helped me out with some credit card jokes. What do you call a country that doesn't use credit cards? A Czech Republic. See, much better. But if you don't like checks, you can always try cash unless you're afraid of change. And checks and cash may be your only payment options if you don't get your PCI affairs sorted. I'm going to share some other jokes throughout the session, but for now, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Moser to introduce himself and give us a little bit of advice, his time as a QSA and how best to prepare for PCI in general. Joe.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm Joe Moser. I've been a QSA for about 7 or 8 years. But like I like to tell people, I didn't grow up wanting to be a QSA, fireman, astronaut, QSA, something I found my way into. But I did come from a technology background, doing things, across the board from, sysadmin and working in the technologies that we are encountering when we assess companies, and then got into InfoSec and did that for 5 or 6 years. I've done assessments for anything from mom and pop to Fortune 100 companies. One of the things that I like about PCI, or I guess what kind of defines me, is I truly subscribe to the assessor versus auditor type of mentality, right? A QSA, the word is assessor, qualified security assessor, not auditor. And I truly believe in working together to prove compliance. So that's it for me. Brian.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Despite my outdated photo there on today's presentation, I've actually been in the industry technology industry for over 35 years. I started out programming in assembly with card readers, if you can remember the old card readers. Then I went into tech support back when 300 baud modems were still cool, if you remember the old 300 baud connectivity. So anyhow, I eventually graduated up to a senior vice president for a $100 billion financial institution. high pressure and low wages. I tell you all this because it really provides a backdrop for the practitioner's perspective that I have. Been doing a QSA work for over 12 years now with 200 PCI assessments. But at the end of the day, I feel the pain for those in the information technology world, for the security teams, and also for the management that's tasked with providing the resources to manage that and manage it securely. So I like to take the kind of the pragmatic approach, but as Joe said, the focus is really a collaborative approach to addressing PCI.
Yeah, certainly in my experience, the QSAs, they do not like to be called auditors, very much specific on being called assessors. I'm familiar with that. Now, who needs to be paying attention today that's on the line? Who needs to be compliant with PCI, and when will this new version go into effect?
Yeah, so I'll take that. So the old adage, anything that stores, processes, or transmit credit card data, or anything that could impact the security of anything that stores, processes, or transmit credit card data. That hasn't changed. That's a 3.2.1 DSS as well as 4.0. But generally speaking, remember, PCI compliance is not a law. It's a contractual agreement. So it's per the terms and conditions of your organization's contract. So what would compel an organization to actually comply with PCI? Could be a competitive advantage. So if you're a service provider, you might find yourself wanting to comply so that your business partners can take certain things out of their PCI compliance scope. Acquiring banks will often ask for your attestation of compliance or your AOC. It's an annual event. Hey, can you prove you're compliant? Again, that goes back to the contractual agreement you have with them. The brands, if you're not compliant, so they reduce their risk, might decide to levy fines against you for non-compliance. But let's be honest, the real reason we're here, I hope, and we are all credit card carriers probably, is that good security is just the right thing to do for consumers. So for those who have to be compliant with PCI, do the contractual agreements, which version? Well, generally speaking, version 3.2.1 has been in place since 2004. The newest version, the de facto version, now is 4.0, which came out first quarter of 2022. So if you go on their website for the council, you should be using the version 4.0. Of course, they needed a transition period because some business model changes, security changes might need to be deployed. So they gave a transition period. So between now and the end of first quarter of 2024, you can use either 3.2.1 or 4.0. So you get your choice. But then effective first quarter of next year, so 3/31/24, you have to use 4.0. Important to note, it's not the date you start the assessment, it's the date the assessment ends. So when you're doing your ROC or your which is report on compliance, or your attestation of compliance, when you're signing those documents, they have to be on or before 3/31. If they're after that, you have to put it on the 4.0 templates. Now, there's a phased approach. So we have 63 new controls, and we'll dig into those in just a second. 50 of those are best practice, meaning you should do them, but you don't have to do them until 3/31/25. The rest of those, the balance of that, the 13, will be included in the 4.0 template, and you'll need to make sure you adapt those before that timeline. So tick, 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 you got about 150 days for that first compliant window, and then you'll go into the second compliant window of 3/31/25. I know Joe's going to provide a little more additional specific changes for 4.0.
Yeah, so nothing's really changed for who needs to be compliant, right? It's the usual suspects, like Brian said. You store, you process, you transmit cardholder data, or can impact the security of cardholder data, right? Typically service providers or some sort of vendor. So it includes both merchants and service providers. But don't forget, it cascades, right? So service providers to service providers. Now, you don't have to collect the downstream AOCs, of your service providers, but companies keep offloading or outsourcing different pieces and parts of their business. So different ones require certification. What you need to do is not only worry about your PCI compliance, but your vendors, are they going to be ready for 4.0, right? So, start looking at question them now. Say, what are you guys doing to get ready for PCI 4.0? And then timing, Brian went over the requirements, that sort of the drop dead date, March 31st and April 1st for 4.0. But that's going to affect each organization differently, right? If you wrap up your 321 assessment on March 31st, you get another year, right? To hopefully not kick the can down the road. But if your compliance anniversary falls on 4/1 or early in the cycle, you need to be paying a little bit more closer attention.
Right on. Thanks for that. I'm personally a big fan of strong security practices. I'm personally glad we have PCI. I credit PCI with helping me be really good at managing my credit card. Even the bank keeps sending me letters saying I have an outstanding balance. Okay, now specifically on PCI version 4, what are the differences between it and version 321? What new requirements are there? What should organizations approach any differently than they have in the past? Brian, then Joe?
Yeah, at a philosophical level, 3.2.1's focus was prescriptive security controls. So if you go out and you read it, it offers detailed instructions on what an organization must do to be compliant, right? So very prescriptive. Thou must do this. 4.0 tried to take a little different approach, and it's emphasizing the outcomes. So it wanted to allow businesses more flexibility in choosing the security technologies and the approach best suited for their environment and their business model. So if you go back at 3.2.1, for example, and you look at requirement 5, it has a requirement for antivirus, anti-malware software. And for it to be configured correctly and catch the most current viruses that are out there, you had to have a signature file and it had to be updated. 4.0 sees that and still allows for that, but it changed the language in there so that things like next generation anti-malware SaaS solutions who don't rely on those signature files would still fall in line with PCI. So that flexibility was built into 4.0. Now remember, with flexibility, it requires more time, right? So if you're going out there and you're not using a prescriptive set of controls, you're going to decide how those controls best fit your organization or your business model. Now you've got to go in and determine which approach you're going to use. Do I use antivirus software with a signature, or do I use next gen? You got to document that approach. We'll get into more detail, but there's something called a targeted risk assessment. You'll have to justify the usage of that. You'll have to validate its effectiveness. You'll have to deploy it. There's a lot of work that has to be done. It had to be done in 3.2.1 as well, but this flexibility adds more complexity. So the changes themselves, there are 3 categories of changes. The first one was clarification, simply changing the words or adding a little detail so that we all understand the control objective itself. Okay, no changes there, just wording changes that help to change the clarification. Structure, those are formatting changes. Maybe they move things around, they combine things, but at the end of the day, again, no new controls. It's just a structural change of the documentation and the templates themselves. Where we're focusing today, it's going to be those evolving requirements. Okay, that's our focus. So the DSS has to evolve periodically to maintain pace with our adversaries, emerging threats, new technologies. But what does that mean? Let's put it into perspective. How much change are we talking about? 3.2.1 was 139 pages. So if you go look at the PDF, it's out there online, you can see it, 139 pages. If you look at 4.0, it grows to 360 pages. So 139 to 360. If you look at the ROC, or the report on compliance, that template, before you put anything in it, was 190 pages in 3.2.1. Now it's going to be 486 pages, 486. That's to accommodate the 63 new or evolving requirements. But the verboseness there is primarily to add additional guidance so that we're all interpreting the controls the same. And that's going to be invaluable when you go out and look at it. So you're like, all right, what do I got to do for next year? That guidance will help you build a roadmap for the things that or specific to your environment and your business model that you're going to want to roll out. But let's get into the specific controls. I know Joe has some that he's pulled out and like to go over.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, like I like to say, 4.0 is bigger, beefier, and just better, right? I truly believe they did a really good job with this. Like Brian said, version 3.x, that series has been around for quite a while. And I do think the council has done a really good job. That's not to say it's perfect. It will never be perfect, but I'm pretty upbeat about it. One of the big things is now we have something called a customized approach, right? As Brian said, it's typically prescriptive. We called it the defined approach. We still have the compensating controls for things that are, legal requirements or something like that. But now we have this customized approach, which it's going to give organizations the ability to integrate new technologies that in the past PCI just didn't consider, right? So an example is antivirus, right? Back in the day, you loaded antivirus on the computer. It updated some signatures, and you set a regular scan schedule once a week, whenever it was, right? Then came along these on-access scanners, right, that are continually running, and every file you touch, it's scanning, and the memory as well, right? So we don't want to do weekly scans that slow down our machines because it's basically doing a continual scanning process. So, in the past, it was okay. The QS would say, well, that doesn't really fit into, PCI. How does that, right? And then when you look at it as, okay, does it meet the spirit of the requirement? Now, for new technologies, you don't have to go through that mental gymnastics. You can do the customized approach, and to validate that, we are meeting the intent of the requirement. Another kind of big change is it used to be required that you do an enterprise level risk assessment, one and done. PCI 4 has introduced what they call targeted risk assessments or mini risk assessments, right? So there's a lot of those that are going to be required to be performed. Another thing is it's going to hit a lot of organizations, authenticated vulnerability scans, right? No more black box type of thing. Your vulnerability scanner is going to get a lot more visibility into your systems and to see what patches you have or maybe have not been applying. So, take that into consideration that, maybe you were doing authenticated, but, for PCI, you did authenticated or, something like that because you could get away with it. Now the curtain's being pulled back. So, you're going to have to make sure that you're aware that we're going to be able to evaluate those as well. And then one that I've talked to a lot of peers. I have not heard people talking about it much. What they call bespoke or custom software, right? In-house developed software applications that handle card data. In the past, it was all web-based focused, right? Or your actual Java application or something like that was running the OWASP top 10, right? Now, one of the big focuses is on API security. I read somewhere that something about like 83% of the internet traffic is API-based traffic. To give you an idea of just how significant it is, and it's sort of been a blind spot in the past. So if you develop your own software, you're going to want to pay very close attention to that. And OWASP, you may or may not know, has its own top 10 for API security. So that's sort of something I think that's been neglected that people really need to take a look at now. Things like in your coding, your SDLC, where you're integrating libraries, right? That's also been a somewhat neglected area. Now you need to inventory your libraries that you get from whatever source and make sure that they're up to date and patched, right? And then finally, for the mom and pop type, smaller shops, the small to medium businesses that are doing SAQs. In the past, it used to be just a checkbox assessment, right? Hopefully, you were doing a diligent job at it, but in effect, it was yes, no, or not applicable type of thing, right? Now every requirement in every SAC requires a written answer. How did you determine that this was not in scope or something like that? So the time that's going to be required to be invested in the whole process, whether you're a level one or doing SAQs, is going to increase significantly. So I think you need to plan for that. A couple other things. Wireless, right? Now wireless, even if it is part of your CDE, needs to be segmented out into its own little mini CDE, right? So it's going to take a little bit of an architecture change, maybe, and those aren't done overnight. You can't hard code passwords, service account passwords into your applications anymore, right? A lot of different things that you're going to have to take into account. And this is sort of something that QSAs have never really said anything about internally used self-signed certificates, right? They were just created, renewed on the fly, whatever is needed. Now they need to be created by an internal certificate authority. And they have to be, the QSAs need to check to make sure that they are valid and not expired. So that's pretty much it. There's a lot of other changes, but I think those are sort of the high level things that are going to cause a little bit of pain point for people.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder about Wi-Fi. I know that one can be a killer. You really want to keep that CD as small as humanly possible. Now, I know when I looked at the new version, the summary alone, this was the summary document for PCI version 4, was 36 pages. And as you've said already, this version is significant because the last major changes were 10 years ago or more. Now, the ones that are in effect for 2024 sound like they're a bit lighter, but something to keep in mind for the others that are going to go into effect in 2025, think about this for a moment. You're probably going to need to request budget in 2023 to get funding for solutions in 2024 in order to deploy them and meet compliance for 2025. So just something to think about. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to shove them in the chat. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn to my experts with what are some of the most common pitfalls that you see, problem areas that clients suffer with, and what do you recommend they do about it?
All right. Well, there's a couple, and so the first one is deployment time. So, every time I'm in my car and I look at the side mirror, I'm reminded objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. Well,
Yeah.
This holds true for PCI as well. If you're doing PCI scheduling, it'll catch up to you pretty quickly. So, in your compliance program, you need to look at systemic changes. What will I need? So, Joe went over some of the changes. That's just a few that might be impact your organization, but you'll need to allocate resources. So that's time, money, and staff. So building a project plan now so you have sufficient deployment time is an imperative. The next one is the remediation window. So PCIs and or place and time assessments. So what does that mean? It means if I come in and do an assessment today and I find things that aren't completely working, so they're missing or weak security controls, you have a certain period of time in which you can adjust those and still get a passing assessment, right? That's typically defined in the 60 to 90-day window. And the logic for that for the council is if I come out and test something and it's in place today, and then you have remediation, it takes 6 months, some of those things that I tested previously might no longer still be effective controls. So it's a place and time assessment. So remember, you've been doing PCI for years. It's been out there since 2004. You might have some different remediations that you need, and you need to plan for that. Because of that place and time window, if it goes beyond 60, maybe 90 days, depending on a risk assessment, you may have to issue a non-compliant ROC. You may have to go out and do additional assessments, which might not be included in your statement of work. So there's a lot of moving parts that you want to be very aware of. And the only other item that I'll say is do it right the first time. So measure twice and cut once. Now, what do I mean by that? If you build a roadmap to address the controls for 2024, that's great. And then you build another one for 2025, and you got a third one out there for systemic changes that you're making for your business model. Maybe you're using new technologies, maybe you're moving to the cloud, new service providers, whatever that is. Having 3 different roadmaps, you have the opportunity to do things twice, overlapping, contradictory things. You might deploy something in 2024 that has to be done in redone or completely supplanted in 2025. So I always say, look at the big picture, see the breadth of everything that you need to do, all the changes that need to be implemented, and work backwards in time. You can prioritize so you do 2024 first, but just be careful you don't deploy things in 2024 that'll have to be undone or redone in 2025, wasting those valuable resources that you have.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think the number one pitfall, procrastination, right? We've been doing this forever, right? This is old hat to us. It's really not. It's a new hat, right? All the things that we've been talking about, these are not insignificant changes. I'll go back and talk about the API security, right? And libraries and things like that. If you wait until your QSA walks in the door to do your annual assessment, and they start digging into that and determine that you haven't done anything, it's not going to be an insignificant process to go back and do that, right? That there's going to be findings. So start now, right? Right now. Do a gap assessment or a readiness assessment. Either do it internally or engage the services of a QSA. If you've been using a Q, right there, QSAs need to be certified for 4.0. We all had to go through and take a training session and a test to be able to perform PCI 4.0 assessments, whether we were certified for 321 or not. So get the advice of a QSA. Start looking at those targeted risk assessments, right? Those things are going to take time to do. Note the recurring requirements, because for example, right, there was always the, okay, you got to do your quarterly scanning, right? Well, now it's a little bit more, it's got to be every 3 months, right? Not the last day of Q1 and then the first day of Q2, right? So you need to be aware of those things. They sort of tightened up those little things. And then what I suggest is read the guidance, right? Don't just look at the ROC. Look at the DSS, the Data Security Standard, that lists every requirement, and they have guidance for it, FAQs. Read those. That will help you. I, as a QSA, if you called me up today and asked me a question about a certain requirement, I'm not one of these people that can quote you chapter and verse of every requirement and sleep with the PCI Bible under my pillow, right? I suffer from CRS, can't remember stuff, right? So I'm going to go back. I'm going to reread the requirement. I'm going to read the guidance and make sure that I'm giving you an authoritative answer, right? So those are some of the things to look out for, I think.
That is really some fantastic advice. Now, can you tell me what I should do if I lose my credit card? I couldn't find it this morning. I figure someone must have swiped it.
Mm.
We have a couple. We have a couple of questions in the queue. One of them is, I think we can address right here. We have an international audience today, and one of our viewers is asking, as someone in Europe, does PCI only apply to America or worldwide? Now, my experience is this is a global standard. Brian, Joe, am I wrong, or are you aware of any exceptions?
Go ahead, Joe.
No, it is an international standard, right? So it does not matter where you do business, right? And it could be that you are in multiple regions, right? PCI, the council defines different regions like the US or EU or APAC, and QSA companies have to be certified to work in those areas. Now, cloud environments that span the globe type of thing, notwithstanding, yes, it does, as we go back, right, and said towards the beginning of it, if you store, process, transmit credit cards or are a provider that can influence the security, yes, you must be PCI compliant. And I'll throw in, I don't think we've covered it, right? PCI compliance is not a one and done, right? It's continual compliance. And the DSS spells it out, the data security standard, that you must be continually compliant, not, okay, the QSA's walked out the door and, now we're good to go for a year.
Yeah, and it's important to note it's the same DSS, regardless of what region you're in, and the QSAs get the same training. There's two different trainings. You can get 3.2.1 training and be certified in that, and now there's a new 4.0. So make sure you're talking to somebody with that 4.0 accreditation. But it's the same DSS regardless, and it's the same training. So important distinction there.
Right on. Thank you. Now, I know that this probably sounds a bit overwhelming to some organizations. Do you guys have any suggestions what clients may be able to do to limit the complexity of the assessments?
Sure, I can take that. First thing is you want to plan, right? So there's a lot of things that are out there. Let's go ahead and build a plan of all those things that we need to do. If you put that plan together, you're in a better position to do resource leveling, budgeting, staffing, etc. So first thing you do is build a plan, and the way to do that, of course, is go out and do a gap assessment. Here's all the stuff I need to do through the lens of your organization's business model and plan changes. And then once you have all the stuff you need to do, a phased approach. You can do the big bang and roll everything out at once, but my guess is there may be some capital investment. There'll be staff that needs to be involved. So by rolling out pieces, parts for that plan, so put a project plan together, use a PMO office if you can, project management office, then you can spread out the cost, you can spread out the learning curve. There might be impact to your business model. Your clients might be impacted if you start offering mobile payment on a web application. That's different. So you have a different support model. So you need to have that plan. You need to do a phased approach, and that'll give you the most runway for any issues that you find. You can quickly go out and remediate those. Whereas if you roll everything out at once, you've got the same resources trying to fix multiple problems, and that typically doesn't go well from a staffing perspective.
Right on. So I see we're running a little over time, but there's at least one more question that I want to ask. This is the action-driven one. What's your best advice for clients to do right away? We've heard some of it, which is like plan early, but what should they do tomorrow morning to better position them for success?
Well, I'll go first and then I'll let Joe correct me. But the first thing you want to do is plan for rejection. Like I said, PCI has been around since 2004. So your senior management probably thinks it's on autopilot. It's just one more of the same, right? But when you look through the lens of 4.0 and all the changes that could impact your organization, both in 2024 and 2025, it's best to plan that they're going to come back and maybe not give you the capital investments you might need for a new SIM, for example. Once you've got hopefully the buy-in from your senior management, start now. Joe brought it up, but you're going to need resources, time, money, and staff to deploy all these new controls, validate they're working. So start immediately, have the most runway. That'll give you an opportunity to deploy it, fine-tune it, operationalize it, document it, and then test that it's effective. The gap assessment will get you there. It'll tell you what controls you need to do specific to your environment. And then the last piece, with that gap assessment, build a roadmap for, again, all of the controls so you don't have to do any rework. That's the first 4 steps that I would put in place if I was going to go revisit my PCI program. Joe?
Yeah, I would suggest, obviously start now, right? But engage your QSA, right? Right now, talk to them and say, we don't want to wait. We'd like a gap assessment, a readiness assessment, right? See where we stand today and what do we need to do. Don't wait until your assessment kicks off to find out that you have all of these gaps. I like to say, you ask 5 QSAs a question, you get 6 different answers, right? So make sure you're engaging your QSA and not somebody over some beers or something to get an authoritative answer. One thing I'd like to say long term, I am a big fan of reducing scope, right? And to me, the number 1, number 2, and number 3 ways of doing that, tokenize. Not just tokenize and go out and get a tokenization device, but outsource your tokenization, right? Because you internally tokenize, you're shifting that a little bit from your database to your tokenization device in the compliance responsibility, but outsource that tokenization. Do you really need cardholder data? You need money, right? You need payment for your services. but do you actually need the cardholder data, or can you outsource that to a third-party tokenization service and offload that burden and reduce your compliance?
And that's been our time here today. Thank you very much for that. It went by so quickly, but I want to respect people's time and thank all of you for joining us here to hear about PCI version 4.0 and what you need to do to prepare. I hope you enjoyed your time with us, and we'll come back again. And I really want to take a moment to thank Brian and Joe for offering their expert wisdom in what can be a really challenging area for organizations. Now remember, we have the expertise to assist you with your PCI needs. Just give us a call at CISO Global and let us demonstrate how cybersecurity for us is a culture, not a product. Have a fantastic rest of your day and week. Thank you.